Today's webinar going. I just want to welcome everybody and want to thank everybody for making time to join this bi-monthly webinar on India's religious freedom conditions. My name is Matthias Bertula and I serve as the Director of Advocacy for International Christian Concern in Washington, D.C. And I just want to welcome and thank all of our partners who help us put on these briefings on a bi-monthly basis. I want to begin a little bit about how this progression of persecution has really taken root in India under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi since he took power in 2014. We've noticed a dramatic rise in cases of Christian persecution throughout the country in various states across the country. And there are several different forms of manifestations that we see happening throughout the state of India in terms of how the persecution manifests. One of these indicators comes in the form of, well, let me backtrack a little bit. Significant issues facing Christians in India include physical assault of people, properties, places of worship, anti-conversion laws, blasphemy laws, impunity, forced reconversions to Hinduism, and general discrimination in India's legal and social structures. Physical violence and impunity, let me unpack that a little bit for you today as well. Attacks on Christians and other religious minorities often go unpunished. In most cases, Hindu nationalist political leaders use anti-minority rhetoric for political gain. This form of speech inspires more assaults on minorities when the police and local authorities take no action against radicals and emboldened extremists. Year after year, attacks on minorities are reported in greater number than before, especially since Prime Minister Modi and the BJP took power in 2014. Anti-conversion laws. These are formally known as Freedom of Religion Acts. Anti-conversion laws allow state governments in India to regulate religious conversions and criminalize forced religious conversions. Essentially, it gives the power of conversion to the state or local bureaucrats or state level bureaucrats to verify whether or not these conversions are considered to be legitimate conversions. And Hindu radicals use false accusations of forced religious conversions to harass pastors and justify violent acts against Christians who are leading people to Jesus. Currently, anti-conversion laws have been enacted in Uttar Pradesh and 8 other states across India, and more are being considered in other states throughout India. All publicly called for anti-conversion laws are being enacted and explicitly citing the false narrative of fraudulent mass conversions to Christianity and Islam as a justification. Now, this is an important piece to highlight to our audience today. Whenever the BJP begins or the Hindu radical forces begin to precipitate these anti-conversion laws to state level legislators, there is a massive public campaign that perpetuates these fraudulent narratives of Christians conducting mass conversion ceremonies to induce people to leave their faith. This is a complete falsification. It is a false narrative that does not take place at all. It is lies and is used by the Hindu radicals to mobilize grassroots support for these anti-conversion laws that eventually are used for persecuting Christians in particular. And I'll dive into this particular aspect a little bit more later in my remarks here. The other items that we see this persecution manifesting is through forced reconversions or Gar Wapsi. Radical Hindu nationalists use violence and social pressure to force religious minorities to reconvert to Hinduism. These programs are called the Gar Wapsi, which translate to the homecoming, essentially in English. India also has a blasphemy law that's often used by Hindu radicals, essentially that criminalizes any action that offends the religious sentiments of another. It's very poorly worded, and it's often misused by Hindu radicals to accuse Christians essentially on no grounds whatsoever. Hindu radicals use false blasphemy allegations to harass pastors and to justify their violent acts. In fact, many times when this law is even incited, or when a violent incident takes place in a church or in a prayer meeting or whatever Christian function might be happening, Many mobs of Hindu radicals will show up at those churches or those gatherings, beat up those who are participating in the service, including the pastors. And finally, if and when the police arrive, it's the Christians that get arrested. It's the pastor, it's the parishioners, the Christians who are participating in the service that end up getting arrested, because under this law, they've incited the religious feelings of another and therefore are going to be prosecuted or arrested in any way. The other way that we see persecution manifest throughout India is through social boycotts. Hindu radicals and local villagers will pass local resolutions that outlaw the practice of Christianity in that particular village. And as a punishment for Christian members of the village, they are socially boycotted. Now, this means their businesses, whatever economic life that they're participating in, whatever kind of social function they might be participating in, they are boycotted, cut off from this community. This means they are discriminated against unless they agree to recant their faith in Jesus. Often Christians are disallowed from collecting water from the village well, from buying and selling goods in the village, or interacting with other Hindu members of that village. Another form where we see more prominent ways that government is particularly doing this, in addition to the legal structures, is through government restrictions, FRCAs, and SC benefits, like scheduled caste benefits. The government of India uses several programs to discriminate against Christians and other religious minorities to stop funds from Christian ministries from entering into the country, so outside money coming in. NGOs must adhere to the FCR regulations that the Indian government has put forth, which is, in theory, this is good, but in practice, it's discriminating against any form of religious or Christian ministry that wants to fund ministries in India. These regulations allow the government to scrutinize and ban any foreign funds from coming into the country that it finds concerning. Now, like again, in theory, this may be a good idea, but in actuality, it's being used to suppress Christianity in whatever way they can. This is used to cancel many Christian ministries. We've seen this happen over the last several years. Several high-profile Christian ministries have essentially been targeted under these FCRA regulations. Scheduled caste benefits and affirmative action program for low caste peoples. These are essentially denied to Christians and Muslims by law. And this stops low caste individuals from converting to Christianity or Islam, because they would automatically lose government benefits. This is especially harmful to Christians, as 80% of Christian population in India come from low caste backgrounds. So in a sense, what I've tried to do here to kind of start us off is to give a broad picture of where we see persecution manifesting in India as it relates to the Christian community. ICC has worked with the globally persecuted Christian community since 1995. India has been one of those countries that has progressively gotten worse, and even more so since Prime Minister Modi and the BJP took power in 2014. One thing I want to highlight in particular is the anti-conversion laws, which I'm going to show a brief PowerPoint with our audience today. I want to highlight a report that we've done. You can find this on our website at persecution.org. This is it's a case study on a anti-conversion law that was enacted early this year in Madhya Pradesh in 2021, where we essentially examined what is the effect of this law on in a state like Madhya Pradesh. Do we see any kind of reaction or any kind of increase in persecution? And the numbers definitely spoke for themselves. We saw a dramatic increase of cases, and this is while COVID restrictions are in place in Madhya Pradesh, meaning social isolation, so on. But we saw a dramatic increase in cases of violence and a number of other sectors. And I want to just make this report available to everybody who's watching today. Please let me know if you'd like a copy. You can, hard copy, I can get that to you as well, but you can also download it from our website. One thing that I also want to mention here, is the Constitution of India guarantees religious freedom in all of its facets to all Indians. That means you can convert. That means that you can practice your faith and you can propagate your faith, which means you can share your faith. And if you're a Christian watching this today, you would know that sharing your faith is a fundamental part of being a Christian. This means that we share our faith with our neighbors, we share our faith within our communities, we share our faith wherever we go. This is part of being a missional Christian and living out your Christian life. And this is a right and a freedom that in theory is guaranteed and protected by the Indian Constitution, which obviously is not the case, as we've seen already on the ground. Persecution is manifesting in many forms, and this needs more and more attention. So if India wants to move in a direction of a healthy, robust, vibrant, liberal democracy, this is the fundamental freedom that needs to be guaranteed for all Indians. A few other pieces from the Madhya Pradesh case study. We recorded 49 incidences, approximately 4,000 Christians were affected. 47 churches were closed during this time. We even surveyed 500 Christians in Madhya Pradesh, and you can see the results there. One of the more prominent pieces is nearly 80% were concerned for their personal safety while worshiping at church or at home. This is not even in public. You're in your own safe space in a church or at your home, and you're not feeling safe because of what? The Hindu radicals are going to come and attack while you're worshiping. This is unacceptable, and the world needs to be aware of this. I want to also highlight our annual report where we dive into this a little bit more, the general trends that I've covered in my remarks. You can also get this on our website. You can download it there, and I welcome you to do that. With that, I will conclude my remarks for now. But I do want to say one more final item here is that if you're a congressional staffer and you are working on India issues, you need to be paying attention to this, because this trend line is growing, and it's not just ICC that's making this case. There are several other organizations that watch Indian religious freedom conditions actively, including USERF, which actually recommended India to be a CPC country twice now. If we are not paying attention to this trend, we are going to look back and regret the fact that we did not challenge India on this issue more severely. I want to actually bring my remarks to a conclusion now, and we're going to play a video from our president, Jeff King, with some taped remarks from our previous event that we held regarding persecution in India. So please, can we play the video?
Well, unfortunately, we do a lot of work in India. We're constantly bandaging victims or repairing churches after attacks. The work never ends there. And the reason that is happening is, look, it's because of the BJP. You have the BJP as a party, and then you have the head of the BJP, which is Prime Minister Modi. Now, Prime Minister Modi he is the core player behind all of this. And unfortunately, he's a politician, so he won't come out and make the radical statements of what he actually believes. But the rest of the BJP players do. And their stance, their intolerance towards those of other religions, and their insistence that India only be Hindu is problematic, especially when you're a head of state. But their work on the anti-conversion laws, as well as the impunity which perpetrators act under when they're attacked on the street level, you'll see either a pastor or a congregation, or maybe it's a church planter, evangelist. They're constantly surrounded, harassed. Church congregations are invaded, beaten, intimidated, slapped around, et cetera, et cetera. This kind of action is going on all the time. So the dynamic, what's driving this is the impunity that they operate under. So typically, if anybody's arrested, it's the victim, it's the Christian that's arrested, unfortunately. And what goes on is that, first of all, this is encouraged by the party. This is encouraged by the BJP. It's spoken about. There's a lot of hate speech. And then sitting at the top is Prime Minister Modi. Modi will never denounce these attacks. He'll never say we're going to go after perpetrators. So unfortunately, the attacks go on and on.
Thank you for the video. Again, that was our President Jeff King at International Christian Concern at an earlier event, offering some remarks on what persecution looks like in India. With that, I will conclude my remarks, and I want to introduce Sean Nelson. Sean works as legal counsel for global religious freedom at ADF International. We're happy to have him join us today for some additional commentary on this issue. So Sean, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Matthias, and thanks to IAMC and everybody here, the organizers, for inviting me to speak, and really appreciate just all the great work that's going on here, and the importance of the advocacy when it comes to combating the very serious, the grave violations of religious freedom that are happening in India. This particular session is focused on persecution against Christians, but we know that there's violations happening towards a number of religious minority groups, not least Muslim groups. And so that's something where this is not just a Christian thing, it's not just a Muslim thing, but you are seeing widespread violence and discrimination happening against all sorts of religious minority groups in India at an alarming rate, unfortunately at an increasing rate. And it's something that, as Matthias mentioned, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom last year, after a lot of great advocacy, went ahead and said, no, we need to consider India to be a country of particular concern. And then they did that again. And I think that just goes to show everybody, especially folks who are in Congress, staffers, members of Congress, that this is a very serious issue. It's something that there is well-documented information on, that you have legal structures that are making it very difficult for religious minorities to exercise fully their rights to religious freedom in the country, in all sorts of manners, in terms of worship, in terms of simple community gathering, just living normally, right? In terms of speech, in terms of a lot of different things. And so really want to appreciate that. Like Matthias said, my name is Sean Nelson. I'm legal counsel for our global religious freedom team with ADF International. ADF International is an international legal human rights organization that focuses on protecting fundamental freedoms for people all around the world. Our team focuses on places where the persecution is the greatest in many different countries, and the sorts of countries that are feature regularly on USERF and State Department reports. There is an independent ADF as well in India, ADF India, and they do tons of great work on religious freedom and on protecting fundamental freedoms generally. You may want to go to their website, adfindia.org. But I wanted to just go through a couple of maybe brief remarks on some specifics. Matthias laid out, I think, very well a lot of the broader concerns and really provided a great roadmap for all of the items that are happening in India to Christians. So you're talking about violence, you're talking about the anti-conversion laws, the so-called freedom of religion acts that are anything but that, but that are just pretextual to justify various kinds of mob violence or arrest or harassment that infringe in just the most basic ways. The idea that you should have to go to the police department and tell them, hey, in 2 weeks, I am going to be going to convert here, and here's my minister, and here's all the family members that are going to be attending, and subject me to an interrogation to make sure that I really deeply mean it, in my heart and also subject my pastor to that. And I'm not even sure if you as the police officer are really sympathetic or looking out for my best interests. I don't know who you have connections to or who you're talking to otherwise. To think that that's at all a reasonable system to prevent things like forced conversions, which of course people want to prevent forced conversions, things like kidnapping and violence and all that kind of thing. But that's not what these laws are about. They're about harassing religious minorities in the states that have adopted them. And it's worrying that increasingly more states are adopting these things. And in fact, the influence of this is spreading. In Nepal, there was they've adopted some of these types of laws as well. And there's a very big case right now. I think USERF referred to it very recently, involving, I think it was some nuns up there who were accused of converting people and have had charges brought against them. In any event, I do want to go through some of the specific numbers because I don't believe Matthias went through those, but I'll just talk briefly. So last year, so in 2020, international human rights organizations recorded more than 279 acts of violence in 2020, right? That was an increase from previous years. To put that in context, those are recorded numbers. Those are numbers that you might be able to see in newspapers or that people feel comfortable reporting. As we know, when you're an embattered minority, often you don't feel comfortable doing that. In India, we know that the media is not particularly free when it comes to being able to report a minority issue. So these numbers are certainly low numbers, but they're alarming even just by themselves. Out of 28 states, we see regular attacks against Christians in 16 out of those 28 states. I want to talk about just this year, the numbers, and my computer is acting a little slow here, so let me scroll to that area. So one group has reported at least 310 incidents of persecution against Christians from January to September of 2021. Just in the last quarter, so June to August 2021, let's see, you have hundreds of different folks who are affected by different kinds of incidents, right? Because each of these incidents can involve dozens of people, right? They involve both individuals, but also communities themselves. You've had that with Muslims as well. One database recorded 1,260 incidents this year in terms of various kinds of incidents. To give an idea of the kinds of things that we would normally see. So one simple, one of the more common kinds of things that you see is mob violence against churches that are having worship services, right? So you usually have a small group of Christian worshipers, you have a small church, and one day they are worshiping and they come to find a large mob gathered outside their home or outside the church, and the mob tries to shut down the church, right? Sometimes they will completely attack, destroy, and desecrate the church. Sometimes they will physically attack the members of the church. Often when the police arrive, they do not arrest the attackers. They don't arrest anybody in the mob. They arrest the members of the church. And then they lock the doors of the church. And they say, we're doing this to protect you and to calm the violence and all that kind of stuff. And okay, let's say you're doing that, but then why isn't there ever any follow-up to arrest the people who did lead the mob violence? Why isn't there any actual follow-up? And that issue of impunity is a massive issue. And I think one of the reasons why USERF has recommended India for CPC status is because there does seem to be this culture of impunity from many officials at different levels of the government, even though it's non-state actors who may be committing these particular kinds of attacks. So, this is one example. In June 2021, a mob forcibly chased away 8 Christian families in a village in Odisha after destroying their homes. They also humiliated some the women who are part of the families. Those Christian families then have to seek shelter in a forest near the town, right? They aren't even allowed to live peacefully in the village that they're calling home. This is something that we're seeing actually quite a lot, are various extremist groups or mobs that are literally chasing Christian families out of villages and forcing them to live in the jungle without shelter, without anything. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it is the absolute reality of the kinds of marginalization that you're seeing and the social exclusion that you're seeing these Christian families face. That's how hostile some of the mobs can be. There name you a number of these. June 2021, another instance in Odisha. April 2021, another Christian pastor and his wife attacked. They sustained severe injuries. The assailants attacked them with rods and sticks. July 2021, this is an interesting case. There was a temporary church that was demolished by a local government authority. There's never been any explanations of this. There was no notice. It just happened. And we've seen that actually with Muslim groups as well, local development agencies just kind of demolishing mosques or knocking them down without any notice, without any hearings, without any explanation. I don't want to take up too much time because I know that we only have a little bit of time, but I do want to emphasize just this last point. Well, before I get to that last point, I do want to say one of the acts that can make it very difficult to get help to the people who are there is the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act in 2010. This is being increasingly used against any suspicion of foreign NGOs assisting or working within India, and that makes it very difficult a lot of times to get information out or to assist. And that makes it more important for the international community to act against those sorts of restrictions. I want to close by just talking about citing some quotes about anti-conversion laws, about the issues from a former UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. This is not just us saying it. It's not even just the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom or even the State Department, even if they haven't designated India. You can read a lot of this stuff in their reports, their annual Earth reports, but the United Nations as well. When you're talking about these freedom of religion, so-called laws, the former Special Rapporteur said these laws, this draft legislation has had adverse consequences for religious minorities and have fostered mob violence against them, end quote. Another quote, there's a risk that freedom of religion acts may become a tool in the hands of those who wish to use religion for vested interest or to persecute individuals on the grounds of their religion or belief. So that's the sort of thing, right? This is being raised at the international level by the person at the United Nations who is designated to examine and take note of the violations of religious freedom that happen in the world. So this is not just groups here saying it. It's not just people who are advocates for this. It is independent, internationally recognized bodies and experts saying this is a really serious issue. It's a systemic issue. It's leading to mob violence. We see the mob violence happening every day. So if you're a staffer, please do talk to your member of Congress about this issue. Talk to people who have some influence when it comes to policy with India, and just raise this, that, look, this stuff has to stop. The violence against religious minorities in India has to stop. The discrimination has to stop. So thank you, Matthias.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for those comments. The fact is that the political leadership is not doing anything about stopping this violence. In fact, they're encouraging it through their own remarks and their speech. And I mentioned earlier, I wanted to show you a video about what life actually looks like on the ground for many Christians. This is just one incident that took place in Uttar Pradesh, where essentially a group of Hindu radicals attacked two street preachers who were just wanting to pray for people in the district. That's it. So I want to warn our audience, this video does have some graphic to it. So definitely viewer discretion is advised. But let me share my screen and watch the video. This is also from our President Jeff King giving some introductory comments into the video.
You know, for years you have heard me talk about persecution in India. It's always, I think, surprising to people how bad the persecution is there. And honestly, we get a lot of videos of actual persecution events like beatings, attacks, etc. Lots of these videos. And I really haven't showed them to you, and I thought I'd show you one, and we'll probably show you more of it. Anyways, take a look at this.
वही बस भैया हम यही बात बोल रहे हैं कि हमको जो ये महामारी तो हमको इसमें दुआ प्रार्थना भी करना है ठीक है और तू पहले मेरी बात सुन तू इतना बोल दिया ना हां भैया ये क्या बोलते हैं इटली में जो सबसे बड़ा चर्च है ठीक है वहां चर्च है मादर चोद जब वहां उनका यीशु ये बीमारी नहीं रोक सका तो क्या अपनी मां चुदाएगा बताओ बोलो ना और पहले बोल रहा हूं दोबारा अगर वो किया तो तुम्हारी मां चुद डालूंगा समझ भाई दो भाई भाग तेरी माँ की बात
Pause the video there, but I think you can tell it is very difficult for Christians in many parts of India to practice their faith. But that's just one video of many incidents that take place almost on a daily basis throughout India, just the ones that we hear about. So I hope you take that to heart, and I hope it stirs in you and you want to take some sort of action on this, especially if you're on the Hill or if you're any kind of position where you're dealing with India-related issues, especially on religious freedom. We need to be addressing this. We need to be taking a lot more, taking this situation a lot more seriously. But with that, I'd like to introduce our third speaker today. Rashid Ahmed serves as Executive Director for the Indian American Muslim Council, one of our partners organizing the event. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Matthias. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I actually have to pivot to my written comments here because what I was going to cover pretty much Matthias and Sean covered it. So I'll pivot to something written. We are preparing to send it to the congressional offices and other similar offices. So bear with me. Ever since Narendra Modi became Prime Minister of India in 2014, the attacks on Muslims and Christians have escalated sharply. This escalation is not by design. It is hardwired into the ideology of Hindutva that was first propounded by Vinayak Savarkar, the patron saint of Mr. Modi's political party, exactly 100 years ago. As it is well known, Savarkar wrote a treatise called Essentials of Hindutva, in which he called communists, Muslims, and Christians as the key enemies of the Indian nation and its Hindu people. Savarkar named the Indian subcontinent the Great Hindu Rashtra, or nation, insisting that it had a common geography, religion, and culture. In this imagination, India and Hindu were interchangeable, and he explicitly said that Muslims and Christians could not be Indians unless they renounced their quote-unquote foreign religions and accepted the supremacy of the Hindu religions, its gods, culture, In this view, Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs had to bow before the Hindu culture. Christoph Jafferle, one of the most noted scholars on Hindu nationalism, calls Savarkar's work the first character of Hindu nationalism. In his last book that he wrote in 1963, just before his death, Savarkar's death, Six Glorious Epochs, Savarkar said Muslims and Christians aimed to destroy Hinduism. He openly called for India to adopt authoritarian rule like Nazi Germany and fascist Italy did. So even if we are alarmed today at the rise in the violence against Christians and Muslims in India, we must understand that the hatred and bigotry is not something that started out when Modi became Prime Minister 7.5 years ago. The hatred, bigotry, and violence against Christians and Muslims is the only agenda, the only action item for Rashtriya Swayamsangh, the RSS, which is the motherhood of Hindu extremism in India. The RSS was founded in 1925, which makes it 96 years old today, and it has never wavered in its commitment to attacking Muslims and Christians in India. It has been recorded that the RSS membership had grown to 600,000 volunteers in the 1940s when India gained independence. There are thousands of reports of Indian government's own intelligence departments that the RSS and its cadres were involved in mass violence against Muslims during India's partition years of 1946 and 1947. Today, the RSS is said to have well over 5 million members, but tens of millions more as sympathizers. What Modi has done is provided widespread impunity to Hindu extremist mobs across the country, emboldening and empowering them to act out their bigotry and hatred with extreme violence. Across India, Christian pastors and Muslim imams are routinely arrested and put in prison as the entire criminal justice has been radicalized. Such radicalization has, of course, swept through the police forces and other security agencies, but also through the community of liars, who often publicly refuse to take up cases of Christians and Muslims falsely accused of crimes of forced conversions and others. Saddest of them all is the radicalization of judiciary, who openly practice discrimination against Christian and Muslim accused, denying them bail and incarcerating them for decades. Hindu nationalists today are appointed to prominent cabinet and ministerial level positions in government. The man who was the head of Bajrang Dal, a criminal militia that is a wing of RSS in the state of Odisha, when a priest from Australia and his two sons were burned to death in their car, was appointed a federal minister by Modi in 2019. India's government, as well as the governments in many states, will need to take various steps to stop the violence against Christians. They have to act proactively and move decisively. Otherwise, the situation will continue to get worse. Firstly, the government needs to enact a comprehensive national legislation against targeted and communal violence. For this, India's parliament needs to deliver on the promise of India's constitution that guarantees the freedom to practice any faith. Without an active law that criminalizes attacks on minorities, this constitutional guarantee remains a dead letter. Secondly, the federal government must stare down the state governments in states such as Uttar Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, among others, to repeal their unconstitutional laws that have limited religious freedom and are being misused by these to target minorities. Thirdly, India's federal government must enforce the rule of law and arrest the Hindu extremist groups that are threatening and committing violence via pre-planned attacks on Christians. Next, the government needs to ensure that stringent action is taken against violators under criminal law. All that governments must prosecute those all state government must prosecute these police officials who fail in their constitutional duty to protect the minorities from practicing their faith and actually are complicit in the attacks on religious minorities. The shielding of the attackers must immediately stop. The federal government must immediately ensure that a Commission for Human Rights and a Commission for Minorities is operational in every state, and that members of each commission are appointed by transparent and non-partisan procedures. Will the Modi government deliver on any of these? It does not seem so. Going by Modi's own ideological extremism that is built on a hatred for Muslims and Christians over decades, we must not forget that he was literally the mastermind of the massacres Muslims and killed more in 2000 in the state of Gujarat when he was chief minister nearly 20 years ago. There is little hope also from the judicial system too, wherein the judges have systematically protected the Hindu extremists, including the high and mighty, who have carried out attacks against minorities. The judiciary has spectacularly failed to even hold Modi to legal account for his role in the anti-Muslim violence in Gujarat. One by one, dozens of police officers and politicians who were directly involved in pogroms and extrajudicial killings have not only been exonerated by the courts, but also rewarded for their criminal behavior. So will be the case for those police officers who are persecuting Christians now. The only recourse available to us now is the weight of international opinion. And that is why it is critical that the administration of President Joe Biden talks truth to Modi and clearly tells him that the continued violence against Christians and Muslims will not be tolerated. In a week from now, on December 9 and 10, the Biden administration is organizing a summit for democracy where Modi has been invited. Will the United States government bluntly tell Modi that his country is on the wrong path and that the US will not tolerate the continued violence against the religious minorities in India? We have to wait and see. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashid. That's a great call to the Biden administration to challenge Modi and his administration on this issue. One of the great things that the Modi administration, or really any state level administration, can do is publicly condemn these attacks that are happening, rather than speaking in favor or even remotely affirming these attacks only fuels the fire. So condemning them publicly is an absolute necessary action that political leaders in India must take. I want to move our program now towards a little bit of a Q&A session. Looks like there are a couple questions that came in. I'll just take a few here and I'll present it to you, Sean and Rashid. First one here: how can the emboldened criminal vigilantes be stopped and their actions be punished? How can hate and inciting violent speeches by politicians and others be stopped? Do you have any comments on that question or those questions?
Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think one of the ways that we've seen the first question about vigilantes or mob groups or anything like that. What we've seen in other countries is that when important international partners, and certainly the US is an important international partner, India, when they raise these concerns at a minimum in normal diplomatic engagements, in those sorts of things, but especially when they raise them separately, or can even raise them publicly, raise them at the embassy level, really bring these issues up, even at the federal level, right, or the national level. That does often have an effect at the lower levels, right? Because a lot of this stuff, the issue is that the local law enforcement is allowing for impunity for certain attacks, either because they are not responding to these, they're not investigating them. Very few, it's fewer. Most of the incident reports that get reported, and there's I believe the last year was 100, or this year has been 150 or so, 149. Only about 25 of those were even investigated, right? But a lot of times the national governments will say, well, those are local matters. We can't really do much about that. But in fact, they can do a lot about that. What's really happening is that the national government is wondering how much do our international partners really care about this, right? How much are they really unhappy about what's happening? Because they have means to influence those local law enforcement groups, whether it's in terms of political visits, whether it's in terms of funding, whether it's in terms of mandatory trainings, things like that. That can happen, and that have happened in other contexts. But without the international pressure, especially from people who are partners with those countries, then it's just going to be, it's not my problem, right? It's just a local problem. So that's what we really need. We need people. We need diplomats. We need members of Congress. We need people who have influence with the Indian national government, who can say, hey, we need this stuff to stop. This is a serious issue. We have a large Indian diaspora here in the US. Lots and lots of people care about what's happening there. We care about India's economy. We care about all of those things. And for India to flourish, we really need you to put a stop to these acts of violence that are happening all across the country against these groups. And the thing is, it will only strengthen India if they do that, right? If they reach down to these local groups and say, look, you got to quit it. You got to stop it. You need to prosecute the people who are doing these attacks. So I think that's one way that is a constructive way of engaging, and that could push some to mitigate some of these attacks and to stop the impunity to some extent.
Yeah. But yes, can I follow up on that?
Go for it.
I totally agree with Sean. Primarily, it is the international community that needs to not just say, but act. Maybe perhaps more specifically, United States government. But I think we need to, as much as we need to focus on US government and congressional representatives, I think anybody who has this is important enough beyond expressing concerns and listening what's happening in India, and actually they have some time for various constraints. If they want to actually make some effect, I think very simple and lot more easier and less time consuming is right in your neighborhood, your own city council, talk to your own mayor, talk to your own city council members, talk to your own civic leaders there. They need to know what's happening in India because congresspersons represent them, your neighbors, your city councilmen, your mayors. If they understand what's going on, it can trickle up to the congressional offices and congresspersons. So one way to do is to directly go to the congressperson. That should be done. The other way is to go through their constituents, because congresspersons' primarily interest is not Indians living in India. Their primary concern, their constituents. So if we educate enough constituents, that can definitely have some impact. It's not going to happen in a week or in a month, but this is a very effective approach which does not cost much and does not take much time. And all the resources you need for what's happening in India, ICC can provide, ADF can provide, IMC can provide. There are many resources available. All we need is somebody to take some time and actually do something. Thanks, Matthias.
That's a great insight, Rashid. There was actually another question that I think you already started touching on, which was what can the diaspora community do on these in this space. And I think that your comments speak to that. If you're in the United States and you need to know who your member is, you need to contact your member through their district office or directly in their DC office and raise these concerns with them, so that they're aware whenever they're dealing with Indian matters, that this issue is forefront of their mind. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, Matisse, and I just want to add one last point. I mean, I know the time's running really short, but I was reading some of the questions, and one of the questions, or a number of the questions I think I've raised, okay, so what could Congress do though? Because this is a congressional briefing. What are those things? And I do think when Congress speaks, that's a really powerful voice. It may be the most powerful foreign policy voice in the world in a lot of respects. I mean, it really does command a lot of attention. And so, when it comes to legislation, to resolutions, to requests for reporting from the State Department, different kinds of funding, but there are a number of options that can be put into legislation. And I think that that when it comes to India, because of the importance of India to the U.S. And because of the situation for religious minorities there, I think Congress really should act and consider pieces of legislation that would raise all of these concerns that we brought up here just today, and that are often raised by other groups and other issues as well. And so I think that would be a very viable and important effort.
Yeah, excellent. I agree. When the United States Congress speaks, there's everybody listens. So that message is very clear. We are running out of time during the briefing, but I guess we can come to a close at this time. And one thing that I wanted to also mention throughout the program was I want to make it clear this is not an anti-Hindu kind of approach, not by any means. We are all for religious freedom. We are against the persecution that's being perpetrated against the Christian community by some segments of the Hindu nationalist community against Christians. And we need to make that very clear. We have several Hindu partners that also work with us on this case and are absolutely appalled by what's happening in their home country in India. And we are raising a unified voice from across the religious spectrum to bring more and more attention to this issue in India. But Rashid and Sean, do you have any other concluding remarks that you'd like to share?
Just following up on those last remarks, Matisse, and again, thank you all, and thanks everybody who's watching out there, and for tuning in. I think these are important discussions and important issues. But just to follow up on that, I mean, it's commonly said, right? No matter what religion you are, right? Somewhere you're a minority, somewhere you are being persecuted. And that goes for Christians, for Muslims, for Hindus, for Jews, for every religion, really. I can't think of one off the top of my head that there isn't somewhere where there isn't a violation of religious freedom there. And Matisse's point is absolutely right. We see in some other countries, especially surrounding India, that there are real issues of attacks on Hindus as well, and attacks on different minorities as well there. Even in India, there can be kind of closing civil spaces, closing ability to share people's thoughts, whatever religion you are, including Hindu, because the violence can kind of cause people to self-censor, right, or not want to share what their beliefs are. And so really, we're standing up for the fundamental freedoms for everybody, right? It doesn't matter what religion you are. People who don't have a religion as well, we stand up for the same fundamental freedoms for there. And I think it's really important that the U.S., which is a beacon for freedom all around the world, absolutely stands up for anybody who is having that freedom denied. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, well put, Sean. Well put, Sean. Rashid, any final comments?
Since there is not much time, I just put my email on the chat section. If anybody have any specific questions, I'll be happy to take your email. Especially Faiha Lako had a question for me. If you could email me, Faiha, we can connect offline. Again, I come back to it's as Sean said, that congresspersons are perhaps the most influential foreign policy influencer, because the U.S. government listens to them. It's just a matter of time that there are 434 U.S. represented U.S. senators. Let's just say only 434 congressperson. Although ICC, ADF, Hindus for Human Rights, IMC, many other organizations have been trying to educate Congress in general, USERF and other agencies, it seems like they are not getting it. It seems like they think it is a temporary phenomena. It will go away after election, after Modi is gone, perhaps in India case, but that's not the case. It's not about Modi anymore. It's about a certain segment of the Indian society that has totally adopted this ideology, at least at this time. And a generation is almost growing up listening only that this is the Hinduism. That is the grave danger. This RSS Hindu nationalist seems to be on a campaign to turn Hindutva into Hinduism, which would be I don't want to say it is a possibility, but again, if the new generation grow up in India, they only hear about Hindutva, and this is Hindutva, then perhaps that can happen. So this is a generational thing now in India. So we need to think of some long-term solutions and starting out in our own backyards, with our own congresspersons, with our own city council, with our own mayor. If we can't educate them, if we can't sensitize them, trust me, you cannot sensitize anybody in India on this one. They already know it, they're living it. So with that, I leave it.
Thank you, Rashid, and thank you, Sean, again for being a part of today. I put my email as well as some of my comments into the chat there. If you would like some more comments from me, feel free to reach out. I can email my written comments to you if you're a member of the press, and I'm sure Sean and Rashid would like to do the same. But with that, we'll bring to a close. Thank you for listening, and thank you for making time today. Have a great rest of the afternoon.